Hi and welcome again to this edition of BounceBack, where we continue to reflect, review and plan to be able to bounce back as soon as we're ready to get back on the court and start work again. Over the last few days we've been looking at the RPT's Theta Fime method of teaching, the technical, tactical, physical and mental, how we actually evaluate a player, assess their levels, set the goals and then put it into both a 12-week plan and then within each individual plan the specific details of those 4 different elements. Today we're going to have a look a little bit more in depth at what Theta Fime actually means and how it works for a player. So as we've said before, it's the 4 elements that are interconnected and combined to make the 4 pillars that we need to actually work with a player and help them develop their ideal performance state. So again, the technical, tactical, physical and mental elements of the lesson, which then combined actually come together. Now this Theta Fime method, we're looking today at just the player, but it also does look at how we adapt and adopt this for ourselves as coaches. And that's something we're going to be discussing in tomorrow's episode, so have a look for that as well. So in terms of the technical elements with a player, what do we actually mean by that? So zone 1 is what we call the benchmarks, so the 5 parts of the stroke, so the initiation, the setup, the preparation, the attack zone, through to the contact and then into the finish point. So they're the 5 things we need to consider within the benchmark area. The second one is the mechanical strength. So what types of grips are we going to be looking at? So in terms of the forehand, do you teach the Eastern, the semi-Western or the Western in the first instance, but also you still need to know the technical elements of all 3, because even if you don't teach the Western in the first place, you may well get players come to you that use a different grip than you may choose yourself. So in terms of the grips, how does that affect the setup? How does it affect the contact point? How does that affect the overall stroke pattern and obviously the outcome of that? In terms of the teaching side, we need to be able to demonstrate those strokes, show the players how they work, let them mechanize those strokes to become automatic within their actual stroke development, and then how to actually implement and make that work in a match play situation. We need to be able to work individually with the players, how to rotate them around the coach, how do you rotate around the players, enforcing those technical elements and making sure we're paying attention to detail. As we've said, the technical element will influence the tactical outcome. So if we don't have a good solid technical base, it will restrict our tactical abilities. So making sure that the technique is fundamentally sound is critical if you want to have a wider choice of tactical options going forwards. And also the reciprocal work, getting players to work with each other, even though one of them may only be maintaining the rally for the other player to do something specific technically, those roles reverse. So it is getting players to understand that yes, this is an individual game, they're working for themselves, but they do have to work with each other if they actually want to be able to improve. And also the difficulties of the exercise. So we know the nearer the hand is to the racket, the easier it is for the player to actually be able to control the ball from beginner working upwards. And again, the nearer the net we're working, the easier it is for the player to actually feel success. And from that, we can then build that technical element, moving back away from the court. Obviously in the mini game, we've got the red, the orange, the green balls, moving on to the yellow. There are different technical elements required within those different balls, because obviously the bounce is different. They don't take spin the same way a yellow ball does. And obviously the reaction with the court and the racket isn't the same. So we do have to vary a little bit if you're going to go down that technical route with the mini players. We do know that setting the technical elements properly in the first place is much easier than trying to correct errors going forward, which is why we try to enforce the correct technique from the very beginning. It may be easier to get a serve over the net with a forehand grip, but we know in the long term we're going to have to change that, and that change is often more difficult than taking more time in the first place and teaching it correctly. But again, it's your philosophy. What do you want to do and how do you actually want to do it? So this is the first part. So then we look at the tactical elements now with a player. So again, the 5 simple priorities of tactics: getting the ball in, direction, depth, and then adding speed, spin, and finally adding power or speed. That's pretty much standard, nothing new there, but it's important to implement them in that order. So again, when you're planning your lessons, look at the tactical elements and how you're going to then apply them to the technical parts. The direction, so learning to play on the baseline, learning to go to the net, are we going down the line, are we going cross court, and developing those tactical abilities basically to be able to move the ball around the court. We then have the different court zones, so both baseline, the rally zone, the defense zone, the opportunity when you can get in the baseline, the opportunity to actually start dictating the play, and then when we get to the net, finishing the point in the normal level. In the pro level, we don't see too much action at the net anymore, because if the players nowadays get a shorter ball, they finish it. In the past, we'd have used that short ball to set up for the next one, whereas now most of the pros will finish it. But at the level most of us teach, that setup point is still relevant and still quite important. So we need to look at the different zones of the court and how we can learn to defend, attack, and stay in the rally. And obviously the height of the ball and the distance that we're away from the court. Obviously the further away from the net, the higher the ball has to go if we're going to try and maintain depth. And understanding simple things like that makes it much easier for the player, again, going forwards. We need to be able to learn how to make decisions. Having tactics is great, but how many times do we actually see players adopt the wrong tactic at the wrong time, or the right tactic at the wrong time? Not always common, with junior players especially, to get the right tactical decisions at the right moment in time. So they need to learn to read their opponent, read where they're moving to, read where they start hitting the ball to in consistent terms, and then building their decisions based upon those things. So not always looking at what your strengths are, and obviously trying to protect your weaknesses in match play, but trying to identify the strengths and weaknesses of your opponent so you can attack to their weakness when you can. And finally, learning how to play the point. Building points is so important, and we see so many times players just go out and hit balls without really understanding the intentions of every ball they hit. And getting the players to understand that is really important. Why are you putting the ball there? What is the intention of doing that? Why are you trying to make that happen? And the more the players learn to think about this, the more independent thinkers they become. And that is really critical, developing good match play situations, because they have to make their own decisions during the match. We can help them as much as we want in coaching, but as soon as they cross that line into match play, our job's done, and they have to start thinking and learning to think for themselves. The physical side, in the first place, the split step, the position of the body, the balance, and then again reading the opponent and reading the ball as to when to split step and in what position to split step, depending on the possibility of the next stroke that the player is going to play. The second one is the adjustment or displacement. So do you control the ball, or is the ball controlling you? So if you're controlling the ball, you're perfectly balanced and you've earned the right to dictate the ball on the next shot. If you're off balance, the ball is controlling you, you have to play the percentage tennis shot back. It's too high risk, off balance, under pressure, to think about starting to change the direction of the ball too much. Again, looking at the different movements, we need to be able to move sideways, forwards and backwards. We know most of the movement on the tennis court is lateral, but we do have to encompass the other ones as well if we're going to develop the whole round player. And how does that react? The footwork, the depending on the grip of the racket, depending on the position you need to set up, depends on the hands, and so many things there are intertwined. Again, the third part, we're looking at the support. So we have the different positions for the ground stroke. Are you playing open stance? Are you semi-open? Are you neutral or closed? What kind of stances are we looking at? In what positions of the court do each one of those apply? So again, we can't just teach one, because we'll need the variation to be able to defend properly, attack properly, and cover the baseline effectively and efficiently. So understanding those different courts, and obviously even on the volley, there's 6 different kinds of footwork in movement on the forehand and the same on the backhand. So we're looking at all the different kinds of footwork, and then you can combine into that the height of the ball, the low volley, the medium volley, the high volley, and how that affects the transfer of body weight into each shot. The different force that we need, obviously again, that could depend on the grip and the stance. We know we'll get more power with a closed or neutral stance than we will with an open stance, but you have to be in the right position in the first place. How do those grips affect the angle of the arms, especially on the two-hander? Are you going eastern, semi-western with a continental? What grips are you using to create those different levels of force on a high ball and a low ball? And how do those levers actually affect the overall stroke? And also then looking at the recovery footwork. How do we actually recover effectively? Is it just a little shuttle step? Is it a side step? Is it a crossover? Is it a wider shot? Is it a modal recovery? So again, lots of different things that we need to include in this physical side of the game. And we can incorporate most of these things into drills, and these drills then become the first element of the lesson, the physical, the footwork. Remember, we build a player from bottom up, the footwork or the physical first, then the technical, then the tactical, and finally the mental side. And on the mental side, we need to look at the environment of the player. Even at the top level, when the players are training, they still want to have fun, they still want to enjoy what they're doing. But there are still the other sides for other people, the social side, the competitive side, and some people are just playing for physical activity. But that's a mental stimulus, and we need to understand and appreciate that when we're looking at why are people coming to us for their lessons. And in terms of learning, we know we go through the different phases of learning. So in the first place, we have to practice the skill, and then it eventually becomes automatic as we move through the different phases. And we need to understand how to read our players and hear them and see them and listen, so we understand exactly what's going on in the players' heads, so we can implement the effective training programs that we need. Talent is always a difficult one to understand what talent really is. For me, talent is something that somebody does to a very high level more than other players do. So it doesn't just mean the ability to play the most amazing shot, which of course is talent, but the perseverance, the persistence, the self-motivation to keep training and training and training every day is for me a talent in its own right. So understand what the talents of your players are and understand why are they doing what they're doing, and look at their attitude and their motivation and how are they actually adapting and adopting to your methods of teaching, and vice versa, how are you adapting and adopting to their ways of learning. Reinforcement, punishment, we're not looking for punishment, we're looking for reinforcement, but we do have to have rules. We need to understand what is acceptable in our coaching roles, what's acceptable from our players, and then how do they take that into match play, making sure they understand what is acceptable and what's not acceptable, both in terms of behaviour and the simple etiquette of tennis. Finally, developing these mental routines. We know for many years we've developed this between point time management, understanding how we manage this time, trying to make sure that between the points we show little, if any, emotion to our opponent. We don't want to give any advantage to the opponent, we don't want to show this, and we have to learn to manage this time very, very carefully so we can keep a consistent approach to playing, and we can keep a similar timing and rhythm to our match play. If you watch all the best players in the world win or lose a point, they rarely show emotion on their face unless it's been a particularly long rally or they've hit the most amazing shot, and they will celebrate that, and rightly so. But most of the time they give nothing away, and they go through the same routine every single time. We know Rafa has got so many different options for his routines. He's perhaps the most significant player to demonstrate for the players, and it's the same every time. Doesn't matter whether he wins or loses a point, he's never ever rushed. He repeats, and that helps him control and manage the tempo of the game and the way he plays. So this is, again, for the player, the 4 elements: technical, tactical, physical and mental. And these are things that we cover in the teaching methodology. And understanding all these elements is critical if you actually really want to develop the whole round complete player and help them develop the ideal performance state. I hope this has been useful in helping you think a little bit about what you teach, how you teach it, what should really be included in lessons, and how we structure a lesson. As I said, this is actually aimed at players, and tomorrow we're going to have a look at something similar and how that applies to you as a coach. But in the meantime, please, as always, stay well and stay safe. Cheers.